You're a student of history, fan of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast.
Yeah, it's great.
Greatest podcast ever.
Yeah, I think it is actually.
It almost doesn't really count as a podcast.
Yeah, it's more like a audiobook.
Yeah. So you were on the podcast with Dan. I just had a chat with him about it. He said you guys went military and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's literally. It was basically. I think it should be titled "Engineer Wars." Essentially, like when there's a rapid change in the rate of technology, then engineering plays a pivotal role in victory in battle.
How far back in history did you go? Did you go World War II?
It was it was supposed to be a deep dive on fighters and bomber technology in World War II, but that ended up being more wide ranging than that. Yeah. Because I just went down a total rat hole of like studying all of the fighters and bombers of World War II and like the constant rock, paper, scissors game that one country would make this plane, then it'd make a plane to beat that, and that country would make a plane to beat that. And then and really what matters is like the pace of innovation and also access to high quality fuel and raw materials. So like Germany had like some amazing designs, but they couldn't make them because they couldn't get the raw materials. And they had a real problem with the oil and fuel, basically. The fuel quality was extremely variable.
So the design wasn't the bottleneck? It was...
like the U.S. had kick-ass fuel that was like very consistent. Like the problem is if you make a very high-performance aircraft engine, in order to make it high performance, you have to... The fuel, the aviation gas, has to be a consistent mixture, and it has to have a high octane. Like high octane is the most important thing, but also can't have like impurities and stuff because you'll foul up the engine. And Germany just never had good access to oil. Like they tried to get it by invading the Caucasus, but that didn't work too well.
That never works well.
Didn't work out for them.
See you.
Nice to meet you. So Germany was always struggling with basically shitty oil, and so then they could not, they couldn't count on high quality fuel for their aircraft. So then they had to have all these additives and stuff. Whereas the U.S. had awesome fuel, and that provided that to Britain as well. So that allowed the British and the Americans to design aircraft engines that were super high performance, better than anything else in the world. Germany could design the engines, they just didn't have the fuel, and then also the quality of the aluminum alloys that they were getting was also not that great, and so
Is this like you talked about all this with Dan?
Yeah,
awesome. Broadly looking at history, when you look at Genghis Khan, when you look at Stalin, Hitler, the darkest moments of human history, what do you take away from those moments? Does it help you gain insight about human nature, about human behavior today? Whether it's the wars or the individuals or just the behavior of people, any aspects of history?
Yeah, I find history fascinating. There's just a lot of incredible things that have been done, good and bad, that they help you understand the nature of civilization and individuals. And
does it make you sad that humans do these kinds of things to each other? You look at the 20th century, World War II, the cruelty, the abuse of power. Talk about communism, Marxism, and Stalin.
Some of these things do. If you like, there's a lot of human history. Most of it is actually people just getting on with their lives. And it's not like human history is just nonstop war and disaster. Those are actually those are intermittent and rare. And if they weren't, then humans would soon cease to exist. But it's just that wars tend to be written about a lot, and whereas like something being like, well, a normal year where nothing major happened doesn't get written about much. But that's most people just like farming and kind of like living their life, being a villager somewhere. And every now and again, there's a war, and so. Yeah, but I would say like there aren't very many books that where I just had to stop reading because it was just too dark. But the book about Stalin, The Court of the Red Tsar, I had to stop reading. It was just too dark, rough.
Yeah. The 30s, there's a lot of lessons there to me, in particular, that it feels like humans, like all of us have that. It's the old Solzhenitsyn line, that the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man, that all of us are capable of evil, all of us are capable of good. It's almost like this kind of responsibility that all of us have to tend towards the good. And so, like, to me, looking at history is almost like an example of, look, you have some charismatic leader that convinces you of things. It's too easy based on that story to do evil onto each other, onto your family, onto others. And so it's like our responsibility to do good. It's not like now is somehow different from history. That can happen again. All of it can happen again. And yes, most of the time, you're right. I mean, the optimistic view here is mostly people are just living life. And as you've often memed about, the quality of life was way worse back in the day, and it keeps improving over time through innovation, through technology. But still, it's somehow notable that these blimps of atrocities happen.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, life was really tough for most of history. Really for most of human history, a good year would be one where not that many people in your village died of the plague, starvation, freezing to death, or being killed by a neighboring village. It's like, well, it wasn't that bad. It was only like, we lost 5% this year. That was, it was a good year. That would be par for the course. Yeah. Like just not starving to death would have been like the primary goal of most people throughout history. Just making sure we'll have enough food to last through the winter and not get freeze or whatever. So, now food is plentiful. I have an obesity problem, so.
Well, yeah, the lesson there is to be grateful for the way things are now for some of us.